Hello and welcome to another episode of the Product Coalition podcast. I'm really excited to be joined today in another Sydney-based series episode with Ben Wirtz. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here. Looking forward to this one. It's going to be good. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Brainmates as the location sponsor for this podcast series that I'm running up in Sydney here. Brainmates is a product management training and consulting team based in Australia, New Zealand and Denver, USA. Find out more about the Brainmates 3-day course for product folks on the 9th of December in Denver at brainmates.com.au. If you've just discovered the Product Coalition, welcome. We're a global product management community that started out as a publication at productcoalition.com. Product Coalition also has a Slack community of over 5,000 product managers, and you can join that for free if you head over to productcoalition.com. If you'd like to watch this podcast, me and Ben, you can do so by jumping on YouTube and searching for Product Coalition and giving us a follow there. And it's 100% supported and funded by the community. So if you'd like to support the podcast, the publication, the Slack community, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/productco. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this session. The topic for us today is hiring PMs and avoiding mishires. Mm-hmm. Before we jump into that though, Ben, with all of the guests in the Sydney series, been opening with a bit of a pub quiz style Sydney-based questions.
Let's go.
So some people born and bred in Sydney have struggled. Others, immigrants, have done really well. Can I ask, how long has Sydney been your home?
For about 5 years now.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
I settled right in.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Well, let's get going. There's just a couple of questions here. So, how many millions of passengers each year does the Sydney ferry system carry?
Ferry system. All right. Well, is this an estimation exercise and an interview question?
To the nearest 10 passengers.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Or million. That'll also do.
Okay. Well, I guess you could argue we've got what do we have? How many? Like 10 ferries, like 10 ferry routes or something. And most of them are about the same size. I reckon they carry about the same amount of passengers, except for the Manly ferries. And I reckon that's about, let's just take an average of 50. They go every half an hour for about 12 hours a day or something like that. From 6, no, that's not quite right. From 6 to 6, 6 to 9. Let's make it 15 hours. So what is that? That's 15 times 2 times 50.
15 to 30.
Yeah. Well, we should have a calculator here. 150 is that about 7,500 people? Yep. And then the Manly ferries that carry about, I want to say, 200 people. Is that no? Wait. They have the counter of 1,000, and they go every half an hour. They're not always full. Let's just say they carry 400 people per trip. They go every half an hour, 15 hours a day or something like that. How much is that? That's I should really have a calculator.
I think what you're trying to say is 14 million.
Sure.
That's, you almost had it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
We almost got there.
But I love the approach to the answer there. That was most important. Being in the world of product, how do you solve that problem? I like it.
Rough breakdown. You can go bottom up, top down. We all had to learn about those questions at some stage. I'm glad these days I'm not getting them asked that often anymore. But thanks for calling me out.
So another numbers-based question. The cost of building the Sydney Opera House had an original estimate of 7 million Australian dollars.
Bargain.
What do you think it ended up costing? A little bit of scope creep.
See, I'm from Hamburg. We had our own opera disaster where I think the original quote went about 10 times over or something.
Right, okay.
And the building isn't even as iconic yet as the Opera House in Sydney. I think the Opera House was, in comparison, just in terms of the multiple, it was cheaper. So I think it was 6 or 7 times over or something like that. I want to say 50 million. That was probably more. That was back in the days.
I like how you use some assumptions in amongst that.
Where did I go wrong?
Slight variance though. 102 million, so more than 10 times over.
Okay. Yep. I'm pretty sure the Hamburg one, the multiple was bigger. I just got my numbers mixed up then.
Yeah, maybe that was it.
Anyway, the good folks on that will Google this now
will
be able to comment and tell us the real numbers.
Well, I hope my source of this answer is also accurate as well.
Yeah, there you go. So
I'm assuming that is accurate. Yeah, indeed. Ken, I spent living in Sydney for 5 years. Where's your favourite spot by the water?
Favorite spot by the water is actually on the water. I'm a big sailor.
Right,
so
okay.
I actually moved to Sydney for the sailing. And so I haven't done a Sydney to Hobart yet, but that's on the bucket list. I think when I moved here, I went sailing at least twice a week. It's one of the most amazing places to harbour. It's
beautiful and well renowned for it, and therefore a great place to build an opera house, regardless of the cost.
Indeed,
being $107 million. And what was your favourite meetup or conference in Sydney?
Well, without touting my own horn, I actually ended up organizing my own meetup, the Product Tank meetup, which I knew from when I lived in London, and they have a fantastic bunch of meetups. And so here I'm bringing practical talks to the product management community, and I think we're about 2,000 people now. In that community, so that's my home, if you like, but I will say big hats off to Brainmates as well for running some fantastic meetups in Sydney, and Elena, who's doing great things with Product Mavens, and I think what really makes the community here that we're quite tight knit. In fact, all the meetups last year, they hosted a sort of common Christmas event, which I couldn't make it at the end, so it was really annoying. But we all collaborated, and from my perspective, the more of those things we have, and the more diversity we have, and the types of events and the speakers we bring in front of the community, the better. So I like mine, but all of them are awesome, and I've been to all of them, and the more the better.
Brilliant. You'll be pleased to hear that one of the other guests also mentioned Product Tank when asked that question.
So that's very kind.
No, it's good to have that advocacy out there. Thank you for running through my pub quiz with me. So we're going to be talking about hiring PMs and avoiding mishires. But first, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and your path. Who decided to hire you along the way?
Not many people.
What's been your journey into product? I know, for me, you've got a fascinating background from Germany, UK, now Australia. Love to hear more about it.
Sure. So I've been building products and thinking about building products for over 10 years now. And it really started with me starting a company and building a mobile app, and then sort of realizing, well, what I built there didn't really work. Let's try something else. Iterating, reading more about product management best practices, and really sort of getting a lot of the thinking that was going on around the time out of Silicon Valley into my company, which was in the UK at the time, And so then we pivoted. We built from we moved from building a mobile app into building enterprise software, and worked with some of the large organizations there. So quite a substantial pivot. And we were in the sales space, in the CRM and personal CRM space. And so I think we tracked about 80 competitors or so at one time. And then we folded and liquidated the company 3.5 years after we started, and looked at that list of competitors, and it looked all the ones that were still alive, which I think were about 10 or so. They went through basically the same pivot we did, but executed better. And I think none of us had enterprise experience. So what it taught me was that our thinking was going in the right direction. But I really wanted to learn more from about enterprise software and about building companies and products in a better way. So I thought, what better way to do this than joining an organization that has very successful products and picking up some knowledge there. So I was very fortunate that Atlassian decided to sponsor me and get me to build a new product over there in the Jira team, Jira Core, which was sort of the first dedicated product from Atlassian for the non-technical teams. And so that was sort of me moving from being an entrepreneur to and product person to an intrapreneur and senior PM. So Atlassian did decide to hire me. There's some fantastic people there, and there's so much that I learned and so much that I'm grateful for a lot of the people that I met. And then after Atlassian IPO'd, it was sort of time for me to move on, and I ended up falling into consulting. So for 3.5 years, I worked with about 50 companies and was involved now overall in 40 product launches, and sort of helped organizations with product strategy and accelerating their growth, as well as accelerating internal delivery and helping teams and their processes to make progress there, and then started to teach product management as well as at General Assembly, and coach product managers as well, for example, at Airtask and a lot of other organizations. And so many of the product managers, which piqued my interest into this topic, many of the product managers that I coached that I would have hired in a heartbeat were, when I sent them to some companies here in Sydney hiring for PMs, they rejected them, even just not final interview, but just based on their CV. And I felt like there was a lot of organizations that were just their filtering mechanism wasn't quite right. So they had a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives. And so ultimately I ended up joining Blue Chili as head of product and now chief product officer. And so we're advising startups and other ventures that we build with our internal team of PMs, designers, and engineers, and so we're all about helping them grow, and that involves us building our own team, but also helping the startups sort of create their own product teams, and not rarely they're at some stage asking for, hey, what should I be looking for in a product manager? And so, that sort of led me ultimately here and to write about this topic on Product Coalition, and to for us to have a chat about this.
It's great to have you contributing to the Product Coalition publication on
My
Medium.
pleasure.
It is great. If you head to productcoalition.com and search for Ben's name, you'll find all of his articles on there. Recommend that as a read. So, I believe you see some common mistakes that companies make when hiring PMs. Could you talk about that? Maybe, I suppose, from the start of the process when they're thinking about hiring PMs through to the transaction of hiring a product manager. What are you seeing in terms of mistakes along the way?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest one is really that a lot of organizations seem to think of product management as sort of a standardized role, as sort of a .NET developer or a UI designer, and even there, there's a big spectrum of those engineers. But for product management, what I see is just very standardized job specs. So it feels to me like a lot of organizations look at, someone else is hiring a product manager. Well, let's check out the job specs. What are they looking for? You have conversations around it, and there's usually 3 requirements which I see in almost every job specification for product managers, which I think are all, that's what I've written about, which are all superficial and have actually no correlation with the success of a product manager at the end of the day. The first one being that people want someone with product management experience. It's almost impossible to find even junior PM roles without the requirement of at least 2-3 years product management experience. And product managers, of course, they don't grow on trees. They are, and nobody's born to be a product manager. There's just people who just happen to have the right thinking. And so for example, at Blue Chili, most of the people in our product management team have never been product managers before. But at the same time, they actually need to be product advisors, because if a startup comes to us and we do the product management for them, and then they move on, and we want our startups to be independent, they will they don't know how to do the product management stuff. So we actually need to teach them, right? So in many ways, we need people who are sort of at the senior product management level, but we don't need them to have all knowledge and expertise and experience in all areas of product management. There's very specific areas that we need them to have experience, and they built that up in all sorts of other areas. One of our best PMs, he ran a bar before he joined us as product manager, and he's doing an incredible job. He also ran a growth agency, so there's a little bit of a background there. But I think the key is just having the title product management has no correlation with your success as PM. The other 2 that I often see is technical experience, so coming from a technical background. And sure, in some cases that helps, but I feel like, reading this, people have this requirement because the product managers need to talk to the engineers, and we want to make sure that the engineers don't bullshit the PMs. And I think that's fundamentally wrong thinking. I find engineers often some of the people with the most integrity in an organization, and PMs also need to interface with sales and marketing and all sorts of other areas, and we don't expect them to have experience and all of that. So I think that's a little bit flawed. And the last thing that I always have to smirk about is industry experience, right? If I'm an organization building something in the insurance space, insurance tech, right, then I want someone to have experience in the insurance space, and that's just problematic because what you want to do with a product manager is build a better product so you can grow faster, and growth comes from differentiation. And differentiation comes from thinking differently. So when it comes to innovation, it's almost you're sort of disincentivized to hire someone who comes from the space and thinks like everyone else in the space, right? And a good product manager with the right tools will be able to think themselves into any area, which we do it at Blue Chili all the time, right? We run an accelerator in the health tech space and in the let's say in logistics and sustainability, and then in the property space, and then in the education space. And we can't change our PM team for every accelerator, right? So, but with a consistent set of good practices, they're able to think themselves into a new business model, new problem spaces, everything consistently. And I think that's really important as a product manager, that you've got that skill set. So industry experience in my mind is one of those areas that I would not even think about.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here is that there's check your weighting as well. Are you weighting too much on experience or industry? You mentioned skill set, but I'm also hearing there being broad in terms of mindset and having common principles as to how you want your product managers to behave. Is something more higher to be focusing on rather than someone who matches your exact industry experience and subject matter expertise that you're looking for.
Yeah, correct.
We just before we hit and record on this, we spoke about the dimensions of product management. Right. It's a broad topic. Adrian, who was on the previous recording of the podcast, talked about the fog of product management because, again, there's no clear lines between roles like UI or UX. Even that has a blend I appreciate, but developer, UI, etc. Do you see organisations waiting or worrying too much around a particular dimension when it comes to product management, or that they're not seeing all of the dimensions and respecting them all evenly?
I think the challenge is really around realizing where you sit on each spectrum of those dimensions. And there's two organizations that I like to use as an example, which are almost the polar opposites of each other when it comes to product management. And here in Sydney, that's Atlassian and Freelancer. And you'll see very little movement of product managers from one to the other. A couple very, very special people manage that, but I think the way in which a product manager has to work and the way in which they succeed is very different in those organizations. Atlassian, for example, is very, very customer focused, and basically all the designers and even engineers and especially product managers will always think about what's best for the customers and what they want. Whereas Freelancer has a bias towards thinking a little bit more about revenue, and in fact, the product managers tend to have a revenue metric as their target. Right. Whereas revenue at Atlassian is still important, but it doesn't get talked about nearly as much as the customer, because the philosophy is if you make the customers happy, then the revenue will follow. And in fact, in many ways, my team and other teams have made decisions that were in favor of the customer and sort of for that sacrificed a little bit of revenue. But we all and we thought customers would feel much better about making a decision that way. The other dimensions are sort of, how collaborative you have to be as a product manager. Do you want someone who is, really working with the team and taking everyone's opinion into perspective and excuse me, and and sort of, influences the rest of the organization? Or do you have someone who is, the almost literal CEO of the product, and, has maybe the designers and the engineers reporting to them? And so again, Atlassian and freelance, I think, quite different in that area. And then I think it's other things like how mature your organization is in terms of its data infrastructure, and in terms of its product management philosophy, and even what skills and expertise a product manager has around them. Do they have a data scientist? Do they have a UX designer, or are they expected to do that themselves? And then, of course, you've got the different stages of the product. The vision side and the new products 0 to 1 versus just what I call growth product management of taking something iteratively with small experiments to higher conversion rates, and just focusing on that as opposed to implementing completely new value that your product adds.
So it's been interesting you talking through there how some of the almost the business models of those two businesses as examples shape the context for what they're looking to hire for, and what their core metrics of success are. Do you believe that similarly it takes a different type of product manager to work in a VC startup-based business, and by that I mean a completely different type of product manager to one that works for a public, huge organisation?
Yeah, I think so. I think the key difference there is sort of the size of the length of your feedback loop, right? In a startup, you might roll a new feature out or make a release every day, whereas in a if you work for the government or for a large corporate, those release cycles tend to be slower because with each release there's more customers affected and there's more risk involved, right? So you're and I think that requires two things: the slower progress. It requires more stakeholder management because it tends to be more people involved, but also B, it requires patience. And I think, depending on your personal comfort level, I know I'm someone who struggles with patience from time to time. Your personal comfort level might, skew you more like as a better fit towards one or the other.
Okay. I imagine similarly if you're working in a highly regulated or governed environment, it takes a different type of person as well.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
I guess to just focus on growth, for instance, at any point.
And I think your desire for complexity, right? Are you someone who likes understanding all the intricacies of what's possible and what isn't and playing by the rules, or are you someone who really wants to disrupt and doesn't have any regard for the existing rules, right? If you love working in government, then you probably like rules and compliance and all the stuff. Whereas if you want to work for Uber or Airbnb, right, companies that really try to push the boundaries of the regulations a little bit, and were sort of pretty early in the space and required a little bit of regulational adjustment, you might not be as comfortable with some of the decisions that get made, even if they and I'm not going to comment on that, whether they have, whether you think they're going to have a positive or a negative impact on people.
What are some, do you believe there's some key traits that you look for in product managers, regardless of the different types of businesses you're looking to put them into?
Yeah, I think the key traits of, and this is, my style of product management, and what I would look for if I would build a team, is really that someone is a good communicator, right? Because they need to communicate with customers and with stakeholders, and communication is also sort of a key area of leadership, right? And especially the more senior the product people become, they have to become even better communicators and leaders. But also I'm looking for a certain amount of empathy, right? Because you're working with a customer and you need to have this desire to make life better for them. So, some empathy helps with that. But you also need to have empathy for your team, especially the engineering team and just the needs generally of people that you work with. So you're a little bit realistic and take their needs in the whole delivery into consideration and their state of mind as well, so you know how to work with them. And then the last thing is really analytical skills and analytical thinking in general. So that you can take some emotion and also your personal opinions out of a process and look at not necessarily data, but look at facts, right? When you're running customer interviews and identifying the patterns in there. But beyond that, I think what I look for in product managers always really depends on not just the organization and the gap that I have to fill, but also what I've already got around myself in the team, right? So this is where I sort of started building a little bit of a framework to look at, where are the gaps in my team? What am I really missing? Where are the blind spots of the team? And what do I need filled, right? So instead of hiring sort of a consistent archetype of product manager and hiring that type of person over and over and over again, I look for much more diversity in the team so that I know that the team as a whole is prepared for all sorts of circumstances and challenges. If we need to sort out technical debt, then I know there's someone who is a little bit more technical and who can probably talk through those issues with the engineering team in a different way than someone who might have a design background, right? If I know there's someone focused on growth and likes, really the very fast feedback loop and getting things out as fast as possible, and we have a very long strategic process, and I won't necessarily put that person on it unless I really have to, right? So everyone's suited to slightly different challenges and projects, and I think it's because you'll have a range of challenges in your product and or your portfolio. I think it's important to have a portfolio of product managers and as well that are sort of suited to all of those things, and that can learn from each other instead of just having a very consistent type.
What I'd see could be an easy mistake for product leaders to make with that in mind is you've got a great product person, they leave the organisation after a couple of years, and you put the same job description out to the market that you put out 2 years ago, and you're not reflecting your current needs within the team. I can imagine it's easy to do, but you're not going to get the great outcomes of really tuning that position for what you're looking for now.
Yeah, correct. I think it's very important to reflect on why, maybe the star performer in your team or someone who, you're sorely missing in your team, why they succeeded in that role, how the circumstances of the product and the role in the organization at the time, and that person's not just skills, but general experience, way of thinking and personality, how that was all very much aligned, right? And then reflecting on, is this still the case? What we had 2 years ago, has our product moved? Has our organization evolved? And we'll really benefit from just hiring a one-for-one replacement. And so for us, for example, recently we had a great product manager who was destined for a role somewhere else, and I knew this very early on, and we had a very transparent conversation around this, and it was a really big opportunity for him, and where we were at the time, there were a bunch of things that we lost and wanted to replace, but there was also things where we thought, actually, for the challenges ahead, it'd be awesome to have something slightly different there, and we ended up finding the perfect fit.
Nice. Sometimes these things work out. Can I ask, do you hire differently for product managers that you would hire as consultants that go into businesses versus product managers that are embedded in a business as an employee? Do you look for differences?
I think I haven't hired for a consultant as such. I mean, at Blue Chili, we sort of, think of the product managers as more product advisors, but they're always, with Blue Chili and they work with the founders that we work with, but they I don't see them as, going into the client and right. being, client side, if you like.
Okay.
So in that regard, I'm not sure. But when I look at myself and how I've done consulting over time with the different organizations that I worked with, yes, there's probably some things that made me a better fit than some other PMs, and some other PMs might not succeed in that. That being said, it's all learnable, right? I was definitely not born a product manager, and there are some other people who were, way ahead of me at the time when we both started out in product management. And at the end of the day, there's just different paths that you can take, and different paths that people decide to to go down, and sometimes it works out better, and sometimes you iterate at the end of the day.
Nature and nurture. Definitely. Okay. Can I ask, what does your interview process and format look like? What feels like a good interview experience for you when hiring someone? What do you put people through?
Yeah. So the title of my blog post is actually Moneyball for Hiring Product Managers.
Right.
Sort of in analogy to the book over there. And so I sort of walk through the bias I want to take out of it, and how I then filter. And I think of the whole recruiting process as something that's meant to minimize the false positives and the false negatives in your process, right? To ultimately arrive at a good product management hire. And so the first thing is really, again, thinking about where the blind spots and the gaps in your team and your organization where you're at, and sort of defining the top 3 strengths that you want to hire someone for, as opposed to making this a box checking exercise, right? So I want new strengths in my team. What do I look for? And then I define the interview script from there. And then also when I scan CVs, I sort of look for that. So for example, for us in Blue Chili, right, where a product manager has to work with multiple in multiple industries, like every year, in various different business models. I, for example, look for someone who has been not just in one organization doing one thing for a long time, but someone who has jumped around a little bit and, ran a bar and a growth agency and has done lots of other things in the past, right? Or has worked in telecom communications, and has worked in media, and has worked in, has maybe run their own agency and that sort of stuff. So, especially founders, they always make great product managers, almost always, just because they think outside the box, and they tend to explore lots of ideas and tend to be pretty analytical. If they can keep their own emotions out of it, I would say. And of course, I'm biased there because I'm a founder myself. So I think that's sort of the initial step. And then the interview is just about, making sure they've got some of the key traits that I'm looking for. And so I think the most famous product management interview question is, what's your favorite product and why, and how would you improve that? And I still like asking that one because it sort of tells you very quickly, within even the first minute, if someone is starting to think about the problem first and how a solution makes something better, faster, or cheaper, or whether they are attached to certain features, or maybe the way it looks, and is sort of a little bit superficial in their analytical process there. So that's a typical question that I ask. But after that, it's really about can they glue with the team, and do they have something unique that they bring to the table there? So we try to make our product managers meet different people in the team, and see how those interactions go, and if they can instantly glue, as long as we think they've got generally the skills to be a good product manager. And so far, fingers crossed, touch wood, all of the PM hires have worked out really, really, really well. But look, ultimately, every organization has to look for something slightly different, and so therefore, every interview process, even for for different PM roles at the same company, probably have to look slightly different.
I love the inclusiveness that you mentioned there around putting the product manager in front of other members of the team. I think that says a lot for a product manager to win that opportunity to understand this is about a relationship not with your hiring manager, but with everyone in the organization. And it sets that tone really early on in the interview process.
Yeah, and I think that's critical. At the end of the day, when I talk to people about interviews, especially in the product management team, I always say you want to interview the organization as hard as they're interviewing you, and you want to make sure it's the right fit for you as a person and for the stage of your career where you're at, and so giving them that opportunity to see not just a hiring manager and maybe a recruiter, but but going beyond that is really important. And that's why I think a lot of the sort of take-home assignments that I see in the product space, for me, they sort of, I don't use them. I don't like them. And I think the problem there is two things. It doesn't really do anything for my filter. In terms of filtering out or minimizing the false positives and false negatives, right? Because if people take something away, they can spend as much time on it as possible. Even if you tell them, don't spend more than 2 hours on it, right? People can take 20 hours. They can get external help, and this is not necessarily help that's going to be available to them during the job, right? At the same time, they're sort of working on it in isolation. They're not working on it with my team. And I want people to be very collaborative and to take the engineers and the designers and all those opinions into consideration. And again, this is a bias towards the style of product management that yes. I would advocate. But if I give someone some data and then I expect them to draw some conclusions from that without any input from anyone else, that sort of sets the tone of what it's like for them to work inside my organization, when actually, at least for me, that's not the case, right? So that's why I prefer for them to do problem solving and having actually proper conversations with people in the team as opposed to working on anything in isolation.
That's great. Thank you for that rationalization. I know sometimes these can be really personal choices from product leaders on how they go about hiring product people for different levels. Can I ask lastly, is there anything different that you do when looking for a product leader as opposed to a product manager that's really specific, that just suits product leadership roles?
So I think leadership itself is a big skill, right, and a really broad area. So with product leaders, I think you need to make sure that they have enough knowledge of the craft to still be respected by the team, but I wouldn't expect them to be the best product manager in my team, right? Because ultimately they're there to guide and facilitate and to nurture, and not to do a whole bunch themselves. But they still need to be capable of stepping in, right? So I think for me as a leader, it's really important that I've got a team of leaders under me that complement my own skills, and they've got my back on this. So if I'm, for example, a visionary thinking, usually very high level and strategic, I want to surround myself with people who are great at execution, right, and who've got my back on the details, for example. But also, I think you need to make sure and have a very honest conversation with people about whether your values are aligned, right? Ultimately, if I'm trying to lead an organization and there's a leader who completely disagrees with me on, not on a solution, not even on a problem, but sort of on a values basis, then that's going to lead to constant friction and to a lot of frustration, and then potentially working against me. So I think those are the most important things. Other than that, if they are a capable product manager, they can make a great leader. And personally important to me is that they are someone who is actually willing to develop a team and to nurture people, which is ultimately a big value of mine, and something where I had my heart broken with managers in the past, and it's a totally fair decision if someone says that's just not what I want to do. But it's something that is a big part of my value system. So I want to see that in my leaders as well, that they want to develop people and nurture them. And the product management space being so big, right? And especially senior product managers, they want a way to grow and to keep growing. I think it's really important that you've got some broad knowledge and that you're able to contribute something there, or at least point people into the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing so much of your personal style in this interview as well. I really appreciate you sharing exactly what you're looking for, how you're thinking about hiring. It's been great to get something that's really personal to you shared and out there.
I think the product management works very different in every organization, right? So ultimately, every leader has their own style and their own way of thinking about product management. And I think we just need to get that awareness that our style is ultimately just our style. And then see if what people are a fit for us and what organizations we want to work in.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you, Jay.
You enjoyed this?
Yeah, real pleasure.
It's been good.
Let's do it again
It's been good
sometime.
fun. We've blown through the time, which is great. Thank you to everyone who's listened and joined us in this session. Thank you to yourself, Ben, for sharing so much. Please check out Ben's writing on the Product Coalition as well. And thank you for contributing that to the community. It means a lot. Product Coalition is nothing without the people who write. So thank you to everyone for listening. And I look forward to sharing another guest next week, which should be good. I'm in Sydney for 4 more recordings. Ben, you're number 5, I believe. So
Wonderful.
I'm looking forward to sharing another 4 out with you all. That's all for now. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you.